Hi friends, we're reading full color Captain Underpants and the Big Bad Battle of the Bionic Booger Boy. Part 1, The Night of the Nasty Nostril Nuggets by Dav Pilkey. We're big fans of Dav Pilkey in this house, and you can buy this book or get it from the library. We left off on Chapter 14. Chapter 14. The unnecessarily disgusting chapter. Notice, the following chapter is extremely gross. To avoid nausea, projectile vomiting, or other gastrointestinal unpleasantries, please refrain from eating for at least 1 hour before reading this chapter. You won't want to eat after reading it, let me assure you. All of the 4th graders were cheering and petting Sulu as the classroom door slowly opened. A greenish, glistening behemoth entered the room, filling the air with the sounds of grinding metal gears and wet, gooey, bursting bubbles. Some of the girls screamed, "Ah!" Some of the boys did too. "You guys are so immature," said the horrible beast. At once, the children recognized the terrifying creature that stood before them. "Melvin?" they cried. "Yes, it's me," gurgled the wet, jiggling monster angrily. His eyes and nose were dripping with warm, greenish, custard-like mucus. His robotic arms were caked with massive globs of crispy, shimmering snot. And as he turned to close the classroom door behind him, part of his hand came off on the doorknob. It oozed slowly down the door, leaving behind a chunky trail of moist excretion. Melvin squished and sloshed as he jiggled over to his chair. Each gooey footstep coated the floor with a foamy trail of slime, and everything he touched became wet and encrusted with warm, bubbling, syrupy phlegm. When Melvin sat down, generous helpings of greenish, pudding-like goo slowly dribbled down the chair, collecting into creamy, gelatinous puddles beneath him. The puddles themselves were slightly transparent and speckled with thick, shimmering nose hairs and dark red chunks of coagulated blood, which, "All right already," yelled George to the narrator. "Enough with the descriptions. You're making us all sick." "Thank you, George," said Miss Ribble. "Now, Melvin, why don't you tell us all what happened to you?" "Well," said Melvin, "I tried to combine myself with a bionic robot last night, but I accidentally sneezed at the last second." "So you got combined with a robot and boogers?" asked George. "Yeah," said Melvin, "but don't worry, I'm building a Separatron 1000, which will reverse the effects and turn me back into a boy again. It'll just take 6 months to finish." "6 months?" said Harold. "Hey, cellular separation is a highly complex procedure," said Melvin. "It's not like building a robot. It takes time." "You should try taking the batteries out of that combino thingy and putting them in backward," suggested George. "That might reverse the effect." Melvin rolled his thick, bubbling, crust-covered infrared eyeballs. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard," he gurgled. Chapter 15, The New Melvin. You might think that turning into a bionic booger boy was the worst thing that could ever happen to a kid, but it wasn't all bad. Believe it or not, there was actually a positive side to being a lumbering, luggy lad. For instance, Melvin now won every football game he played because no one wanted to tackle him. And when he served a volleyball, nobody on the other team would dare to hit the ball back. Beside being the school's new sports star, there were other perks too. Melvin never had to wait in line at the drinking fountain anymore. Now he had his own personal drinking fountain because, well, would you use a drinking fountain after a bionic booger boy had globbered all over it? I didn't think so. All of the special attention that Melvin was receiving made some of the other kids a little jealous. But not George and Harold. Considering the many evil villains that George and Harold had been battling all year, the two boys were just grateful that Melvin hadn't turned himself into a gigantic, terrifying beast with plans to destroy the earth. It could be a lot worse, said Harold. At least Melvin's not a terrifying, evil villain. Yeah, you're right, said George. I can't think of anything that could turn Melvin into a terrifying evil villain. Chapter 16, The Cold and Flu Season. Soon it was autumn, and the new season brought with it many changes. Crisp, chilly air, early morning frost, and bright, colorful leaves. But with the beauty of autumn came another change that wasn't quite so welcome. The cold and flu season. Dun dun dun. All through Jerome Horowitz Elementary School, people were getting sick. The hallways were filled with runny noses, sneezing mouths, and aching bodies. Sniff, achoo, sniff, sniff, sniff. And unfortunately, one of those noses, mouths, and bodies belonged to Melvin Sneedly. Achoo! Every time Melvin sneezed, thousands of tiny driblets shot out of his mouth, splattering the chalkboard with a thin layer of foamy, glistening, gunky green, tapioca-like mucus. Don't forget to cover your mouth, Melvin dear, said Miss Ribble. Oh, sorry, said Melvin, sorry. He put his hand over his mouth and sneezed again. This time the explosion of air from his stifled sneeze blew off large, wet globs of his body, which sprayed over the entire classroom. It was as if somebody set off a giant firecracker inside a bucket of green paint. The warm, smelly goo smacked into people's hair, splattered onto their clothes, and seemed to drench every square inch of the room. On second thought, Melvin, said Miss Ribble, don't cover your mouth next time. Now, who wants a cookie? That's Miss Ribble. Chapter 17. The Field Trip. The next day, for some strange reason, Miss Ribble was out sick with a cold. Mr. Krupp was filling in as the substitute teacher, and as usual, he was very angry. What the heck is going on in this room? He yelled. What's with all the raincoats and umbrellas? Then Melvin sneezed. A few minutes later, Mr. Krupp returned to the classroom with fresh clothes, a raincoat, and an umbrella. All right, everybody, he shouted. Today is field trip day. Miss Anthrope and I are taking you all to Snotty Bros. tissue factory to see how blow rags are made." The word tissue made Melvin jump. "No!" he cried in a panic. "Me no like tissues!" An eerie silence fell over the classroom. Everybody looked at Melvin in shock. "Did Melvin just say, 'me no like tissues'?" asked Harold. "Yeah," said George. "I've never heard him misuse an objective pronoun before. Who does he think he is? Frankenstein?" Chapter 18. Things Get Bad. In a few hours, the fourth graders were all packed into a hot, stinky factory, listening to a boring speech about how trees are turned into tissues, or something like that. Nobody was paying attention, really, except for Melvin Sneedley, who was terrified. His whole body shook and shimmered as the tour took them down the narrow walkways of the noisy industrial plant. Danger, boring tour ahead. Snotty Bros, a division of Snotco. Finally, the tour ended at the gift shop, where the plant manager, Mr. Snotty, had a surprise for everybody. "Behind this red curtain with black dots on it," said Mr. Snotty, "is a free gift for each of you." Mr. Snotty pulled back the curtain to reveal a pile of sample tissue packs. "Help yourselves," said Mr. Snotty. "There's enough for everybody." "No!" screamed Melvin. "Me no like tissues!" "Oh, don't be silly," said Mr. Snotty. "Everybody loves tissues, and our tissues are extra absorbent. They really help to wipe out phlegm and mucus." "No!" screamed Melvin again. "Tissues is bad magic." "Nonsense," laughed Mr. Snotty. He tossed a couple of sample tissue packs at Melvin. "Here you go, young man," he said. "Enjoy." The tissue packs flipped through the air and stuck onto Melvin's back. Melvin screamed, "Ah!" His eyes began to glow green as he beat his chest in anger. Suddenly, Melvin's shoulders started to bubble. His chest expanded. The flexogromonic steel in Melvin's endoskeleton flexed and grew. His neck and head widened, and his body swelled to a height of 13 feet. Melvin grabbed the tissue packs in his massive, dripping fingers and flung them to the ground. "Don't make me angry," Melvin warned. "You no like me when I angry." "Oops," said Mr. Snotty. "You dropped your tissue packs, young fellow. Here's some more for you." Mr. Snotty grabbed 2 giant handfuls of sample tissue packs and tossed them at Melvin. Chapter 19. Things Get Badder. Frantically, Melvin swatted at the 9 new tissue packs stuck to his upper torso as if they were a swarm of stinging bumblebees. He stomped his giant spiked feet and thrashed about violently as his hulking body doubled, then tripled in size. Melvin kicked and punched the walls of the gift shop as he let out a terrifying, blood-curdling cry. "Ah!" "There's no need to cry, little man," said Mr. Snotty. Here, have some more tissues to dry those tears. He tossed several more sampled tissue packs at Melvin. As you might have noticed by now, Mr. Snotty wasn't exactly the brightest bulb on the Hanukkah tree. What happened next could only be described as chaos. Once again, Melvin's massive body tripled in size. By now, Melvin was roaring and kicking and knocking over giant machines. Children screamed and ran. Mr. Snotty thought it might help matters if he could just give Melvin some more tissues. But before he could, a drop of mucus the size of a bathtub dripped from Melvin's massive nose and splashed down on Mr. Snotty, gluing him to the floor. Splat. George and Harold hid behind the red curtain with black dots on it as Melvin crashed through the roof of the factory. Ear-piercing roars bellowed out of his gigantic, oozing mouth as he kicked down the walls of the factory and tossed heavy machinery into the parking lot. Mr. Krupp and Miss Anthrope tried their best to get the situation under control, but they weren't having much luck. "Hey, Bub," shouted Mr. Krupp. "I've had just enough of your shenanigans. You're gonna be spending the afternoon in detention if you don't settle down, young man," shouted Miss Anthrope. Suddenly, Melvin reached down and grabbed Miss Anthrope in his massive metal fist. "Help me!" she screamed. "Somebody save me!" Said Mr. Krupp nervously. I'll go get some help." Mr. Krupp ran and hid with George and Harold behind the red curtain with black dots on it. "Hey, I thought you were going to go get some help," said Harold. "Well, not today," said Mr. Krupp. "You know," said George, "there's only one person who can help Miss Anthrope now." "Who's that?" asked Mr. Krupp. Well, friends, we're done for our reading for today. Next week, or next time I should say, we will check back on chapter 20. Thanks for listening. Bye.